Good afternoon, boys and girls. This is Miss Bomar, and I am back again with you today, and we are going to continue to talk about characters. So you should have already watched Miss Hamilton's video this morning of her continuing her lesson on characters. She talked to you this morning about characters' emotions and their traits and how they affect the story. Okay, so we're going to dig a little bit deeper today with our character skills and talk about how their traits and their emotions in the story change the story. Okay, so yesterday when we read Thank You, Mr. Falker, a lot of you commented on my video and talked about Trisha's emotions and how at the beginning of the story she felt really embarrassed and lonely and kind of upset. And by the end of the story, her emotions had completely changed. She felt more confident and proud of herself and more determined. And since her emotions changed in the story, our story completely changed. It went from kind of a sad story at the beginning with a little girl who felt really discouraged to a really courageous and fun and happy story at the end because she finally learned how to read and she felt more confident in herself. So you can see by our example yesterday how characters' emotions and their character traits can completely change how a story ends. So I have a new book for you today. Okay, today we're going to be reading After the Fall, How Humpty Dumpty Got Back Up Again. So a lot of you have probably already heard the story of Humpty Dumpty, how he fell off the wall, he had a great fall, okay? But this is a story about after the fall. So what is Humpty Dumpty's life after he falls off that wall? So we're going to read this story, and while I'm reading, I want you to make sure that you are paying attention to character traits of Humpty Dumpty, his emotions, and we really, really want to focus on how his traits and emotions change throughout the story and affect the story. So how do they make the story kind of end up different? Okay. Can you see that? My name is Humpty Dumpty. This was my favorite spot, high up on the wall. I know it's an odd place for an egg to be, but I loved being close to the birds. Then one day, I fell. I'm sort of famous for that part. Folks called it the Great Fall, which sounds a little grand. It was just an accident, but it changed my life. Fortunately, all the king's men managed to put me back together. There were some parts that couldn't be healed with bandages and glue. Okay, so in that second picture, he looks awful sad and he's beat up. We can see he's got bandages all over him. And then up on his wall, look above his bed. He's got lots and lots of pictures that he's drawn of birds. Okay, that might be an important part of our story. But his emotion right now in that picture, he looks pretty upset and discouraged. After that day, I became afraid of heights. I was so scared that it kept me from enjoying some of my favorite things. Okay. I walked past the wall every day, and I would think about climbing that ladder again. I really missed the birds and being high above the city, but I could never do it because I knew that accidents can happen. Okay, so right now he's feeling discouraged and afraid, and his character traits is he's a little embarrassed because he fell off the wall, and he's not very sure of himself. He's kind of self-conscious. He doesn't feel very confident right now about doing the things that he used to love. I eventually settled for watching the birds from the ground. It wasn't the same, but it was better than nothing. Then one day, an idea flew by. Okay? An idea flew by. So that picture, that looks like a paper airplane to me. So maybe that's something, maybe that's where his idea comes from. Making planes was harder than I thought. It was easy to get cuts and scratches, but day after day I kept trying and trying. Okay, so a good character trait that we talked about, and I think Miss Hamilton talked about it, was on that page it said he kept trying and trying. So we can see his character traits already starting to change a little bit. He went from being completely defeated to becoming a little more determined and excited about something. Until I got it just right. My plane was perfect, and it flew like nothing could stop it. I hadn't felt that happy in a long time. It wasn't the same as being up in the sky with the birds, but it was close enough. Okay, his emotions starting to change now. He's getting a little more excited and more happy. Unfortunately, accidents happen. Oh, I wonder what happened. They always do. So it looks like his paper airplane went flying over that big, great wall that he used to sit on. Let's see what he does. I almost walked away again, but then I thought about all the time I'd spent working on my plane and all the other things I'd missed. I decided I was going to climb that wall. But the higher I got, the more nervous I felt. I didn't want to admit it. I was terrified. Okay, there are a lot of good feelings in this book. He was nervous. He was terrified. Okay, so his emotions have changed a lot in this book. I didn't look up. I didn't look down. I just kept climbing, one step at a time. Until I was no longer afraid. He got all the way to the top of that wall. Maybe now you won't think of me as that egg who was famous for falling. Hopefully you'll remember me as the egg who got back up. Then it looks like something cracks out of his shells. Out of his shell. Looks like wings cracked out of his shell. And learned how to fly. The end. Okay, so that was a really awesome story of how characters' traits and their emotions can completely change how the story is. So in the beginning of the story, let's talk about his traits at the beginning of the story. At the beginning of the story, Humpty Dumpty felt kind of embarrassed and sad and lonely and afraid and terrified. And his emotions changed throughout the story. Okay, and his traits changed throughout the story. He became more determined and more confident and more brave. Okay, he was really, really brave when he walked up that ladder to get back to the top of the wall, even though he was scared. So if he would have stayed scared throughout the entire story, our story would not have had the awesome ending that it did, where he got his wings and he was able to fly and see all the birds up high. Our story would have had a more sad ending. So his emotions kind of changed how our story ended and how our story went. So characters' emotions, like Miss Hamilton said in her video, can completely affect a story. So if their emotions change and their character traits change, it can completely change how our whole story ends. So what I want you to do is in the comments, or you can write it on a piece of paper and post it into Google Classroom, is I want you to tell me how Humpty Dumpty's emotions changed throughout the story. So how were they at the beginning of the story to the end of the story, and how that affected the story. So how did Humpty Dumpty's emotions change how our story ended? Or how would the story have ended if his emotions would not have changed? Okay, I'm excited to read your comments. If you need any help, rewatch Miss Hamilton's video, rewatch my video, or you can ask us a question in Google Classroom. I will see you guys tomorrow.